Welcome to the Unpack, your place for quick, convenient, and informative stories in and around the endurance sport world. I'm your host, Miguel Mattox. In the endurance world, we talk a lot about training stress and recovery. The science behind how our bodies actually respond to all that stress is often misunderstood. One related term that's starting to make its way into high-performance sport is allostatic load. It's defined as the cumulative wear and tear on the body from chronic stress. An article in the cycling magazine Ruler recently explored how allostatic load affects performance, resilience, and long-term health on and off the bike. It explains that it's not just about the physical strain, but how psychological and environmental stressors add up over time. And for endurance athletes, this means the line between training stress and life stress might be thinner than we think. Today, we'll dive into how understanding and managing your allostatic load can unlock better performance, longevity, and overall well-being, whether you're chasing Kona qualification or running a company. Our guest today is Chris Hauth. Chris is a two-time swimming Olympian, an Ironman age group world champion, and the founder of AIMP Coaching, where he helps athletes and leaders integrate training into their broader lives, not as an escape, but as a path toward growth and presence. When I was doing research on the topic months ago, I actually reached out to Chris, and it turns out he's been including the ideas around allostatic load within his coaching framework, especially among his executive clients, for years. Chris's work emphasizes mindset, purpose, and the long game of performance, making him the ideal guest to explore how the invisible load of stress impacts the body and also how we can manage it. So Chris, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to probably reference this article a few times because it's the first time I heard about the term in a more practical sense. You've been studying this for years, but the article defines, this is kind of nerdy, so we're going to break it down, but it defines allostatic load is the cost of chronic exposure to fluctuating or heightened neural or neuroendocrine responses resulting from repeated or chronic stress. So
I think it's good we just break that down right
Yes, that's where we want to start. So you've been looking at this for years, using your lens as an athlete and the lens as a coach. How do you explain this in a more practical term?
Yeah, I mean, everything we do during the day in our lives, not general, but just daily life, has a stress, has a load on the body. So we wake up and it begins, right? And even then we could be carrying baggage from our sleep or the previous day into that we haven't fully processed. We're talking mental load, physical load, spiritual and emotional load. There's a lot of load on the body, right? When you're having an argument with your partner, right? Like there's a stress, there's a little bubbling simmer of stress there. And so when you accumulate all this, you sort of keep stacking up to a ceiling, a threshold. And at that threshold, when we're at that threshold, you're going into the red, right? We're going into some serious tax on the body that will filter into other aspects of our lives, like physical performance, big time. And so therefore, our understanding of where the green zone is, below that threshold, how we're living, how we're stacking that is the key, right? And so our ability to modulate that, to work with that, first understand where our threshold is. Secondly, then understand when we go over that threshold, when we're in the red, how it affects our performance, our outcomes, our daily interactions with people. And then to start understanding, okay, how can I bring that back down below the threshold? How can I regulate my emotions, my physical activities, and so forth, to just sort of maintain in this absorption area? Like the big thing you can obviously think of is from a training perspective, if what we're doing is not being absorbed, it's just another piece on the stack, then it's not ideal. Then we're just basically not going through the motions, but we're not absorbing the training as well as we could, right? We're performing as an executive at our best, or come an event, right? Come a race. Are we performing at our best? Or are we carrying a huge anchor behind us of all this load? And so that's where we start getting into this allostatic load understanding. And it's an accumulation of many different factors.
It comes back to the traditional idea of like stress, rest. And as athletes, we understand that concept very well. But where it gets confusing is when we look at performance in athletics and training our physical bodies to achieve something, we think of that as our stress, and then everything else is rest. But the idea here is it's completely not true. It's not the case. And I think like one of the things that stood out to me, what's interesting is even the simple switching of tasks is stress on the body. And as a triathlete, yourself as a triathlete back in the day, it's like, and as a swimmer, we both grew up swimming, it's almost easier on the system to swim for 5 hours a day than to break up that 5 hours into 3 different disciplines.
Yeah. And I mean, it depends on how the cortisol levels and the endocrine system that you're talking about in that definition, what all affects that, right? And so it could be switching between tasks. It could be, what we define as rest is actually still a simmering load, right? I like to call it, in the executive world, as well as within the coaching world, a simmering 6. Like, are we doing something at a 10, a 9, or are we doing something more at a 2 or a 3 and recovering? But we're constantly at a simmering 6. We're not really allowing the full gas on, training, racing, stimulus, right? Or are we at rest? And so by constantly being at that simmering 6, that's where the cost builds up, and we don't realize it. Plus, obviously, emotional relationships, all those things, they're part of the system. Every time we do something, from how we eat to how we sleep to how we react, how we are emotionally, how we are thinking, all has an effect on our endocrine system, on cortisol. And that constant load of cortisol creates chronic inflammation. And that low-lying inflammation in our body is going to affect us physically, mentally, emotionally, all those things.
That's like a really interesting thing to like think about during our day-to-day is like, am I at the simmering 6 or am I at rest? And I want to get in a little bit to like the practical takeaways of what we can do to understand the differences between those and how to get ourselves away from the simmering 6 back into a state of rest. But let's get into like how we can kind of identify these things, because you're talking about a threshold where these things kind of bubble up. And if we exceed that threshold, then we start to see a deterioration in performance, whether that's at work or in our physical training. A lot of triathletes these days have a lot of figures and numbers that we can look at on the screen that show like where we are in fatigue levels, where we are in stress scores, all of the, all the numbers that we look at day to day. How would you explore the figuring out where that threshold is and figuring out, are we at a state of rest or are we at that simmering 6?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of those wearables these days, right? They start painting a picture. Now, you do want to pay a little bit closer attention to versus just reacting to those, but also how I feel, right? And how is my training being absorbed? It's the similar discussion that many years ago began, and it's sort of under the surface again, of chronic fatigue. Right? When are you overtraining? When are you overloading? When are you no longer training for the absorption of the stimulus and instead just training to train or going through the motions and not maximizing the time you have of your training? And so when you think about resting heart rate, when you think about HRV, when you think about your sleep numbers, that's a great place to start recognizing trends. Right? So why is my resting heart rate increased? Well, notice, today I had a really stressful day at work. HRV is a great indicator to show how you're able to handle stress and load in your life. That's what HRV is. Your ability to withstand and absorb stress, basically. And that variability will give you also an insight of, wow, I am really responding, absorbing, withstanding the day-to-day load. I can come off the high, recover, and come back up again. And that's the important thing, to start recognizing and creating the patterns around so that you can get that threshold that you talked about, right? But I do think the wearables and the tools are great. They're great tools to have these days because they start pointing you in the right direction. Yeah. But we never want to forget, and you know this as a triathlete, we never want to lose our sense of feel. How do I feel? Like, am I sleepy? Am I lethargic? Am I constantly tired? Am I constantly hungry? Am I constantly on edge? Can I not rest? Right? How long does it take me to fall asleep? When do I wind down? What are my evenings like? So there's so many different inputs. And so you want to start painting that picture.
I was expecting a lot of this conversation about identifying this load to be, things that are away from objective measurements. But I think, like, for athletes looking to take that first step, or non-athletes, people in the corporate executive world looking to take that first step in identifying where you are on the scale and room for improvement, having a consistent way to track your heart rate and HRV does sound as important as we think it does. And it's hard to distinguish a lot of these wearables from, like, what's kind of bullshit and what matters. But, and I think a lot of the algorithms that, like, let's say a Whoop offers can be a little bullshit, but they do provide data that is valuable. So if you can discern what's real, that's super important.
Yeah. Extract your own data.
Yeah.
Right? Don't go by their green or by their stress recovery score or a readiness score on Aura and all that. That's fine. That's them making it easy for you. Yeah. Instead, look at your pertinent data and see what in your day. I have a lot of elite athletes do what I call an athlete's journal. Like, what did I feel like the day before? What did I do? How did I respond? Where could I have been better? What grade would I give myself? Did I show up with intention? Did I know exactly what I was doing prior to the workout and what the desired outcome of the workout is and how it fits into the big picture of where I'm going? Like, all those little things. But then add this stuff to it. Right? Because then you layer resting heart rate, HRV, sleep, nutrition, and overall stress on top of that. Now you're going to get some really good insights. Oh, that's where they've disconnected. Oh, that's why. Or maybe not that's why specifically, but I started noticing and that started kicking me over the edge. I just moved into the red. Yeah. A lot of times it's like, oh, my training is just flat. No, your training is not, it's not the training. Look at how you're doing it. And if your body's absorbing it, you might need rest. It's this constant game. And it's so important to have an awareness for yourself. Again, my client example. So his HRV is in the teens. That's fine. Maybe it'll ever only go to 30, but it's in the teens for him. Yeah. And so once we're moving it to the upper 20s, okay, that's something to note. Maybe we can go further. But for now, the baseline, the number is consistently for months in the teens. So now we really need to lean into that. That's a reliable number when you have that many data points.
Before we started recording, I was telling you about how I just moved. And this is a great example of, like, I feel over the last, I don't want to talk too much about myself, but over the last, like, month, I feel like I've been doing less. Because I've had less time to train, I've had less time to get out there and push myself the way I know how to do it. But at the same time, I feel like lazier. I feel out of rhythm. I am wearing a wearable and my data is a little more erratic. I wouldn't say it's worse, but it's less consistent from day to day because I don't have that routine. And I think what you're saying too is, like, it's difficult to pinpoint one thing to pay attention to because we're looking at this. Allostatic load is somewhat misunderstood because there are a lot of levers that can affect it. And it's hard to pinpoint just one, whether it's objective or subjective. But understanding what's going on in your life, I think, is probably the first step. Like, what is different now than it was 1 month ago? And typically, from my experience, that has the biggest effect on how I'm feeling day to day. If something is completely out of rhythm, even if it's not, even if I'm taking more time away from training, it's like my body feels worse.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, old school, we used to have athletes who used to journal on like a spreadsheet, their 15 different inputs on how they felt, right? And what happened the previous day. And then they give themselves an average score. And it was this whole thing. I had a client this morning who's like, I don't understand. My resting heart rate and my HRV haven't changed. And I had a great night's sleep. I'm like, this doesn't go like one night good sleep. Therefore, the body works it's a gentle wave, but to get that wave to swing up, it's going to take 3, 4, 5, 6 days. And I always use an example. My allostatic load is best. I'm in the green the most. I'm the most real estate in green, meaning where I'm at and where the threshold is, where I move into red, that space is greatly increased when I am, let's say, not training. I'm on, let's say, dry January, right? Alcohol has an effect on our chronic load. I'm sleeping, I'm fasting, I'm just shutting everything down. And even then it takes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 days for my HRV to change, for my heart rate, resting heart rate to go down, for my sleep numbers it takes a while for the body to flush this out. Now there's shorter regulation things that you can do, like breath work, going for a walk, forest bathing, things like that, where you really can deregulate, downgrade your load and really get that sympathetic nervous system, to modulate properly. But yeah, it takes this, like you said, because there are so many factors. And I think the latest in physiology is talking about 12 to 15 different inputs.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right? Like it's like, that's a lot. Like,
yeah.
But your ability to recognize, okay, what today was stressful. Okay, I had a stressful conversation. I also had a stressful thing when my dog went lost. And then I had another stressful thing, like let's say for you moving, right? You put it all together. Okay, 3 stressful things. I noticed how I felt during that. Now you notice, my resting heart rate that evening and my HRV wasn't that great. Those are all little inputs, and it sounds minuscule, but that's how good you want to fine tune it as an elite athlete, because then you're really able to modulate it for the big event and how you line up your life. You brought up swimming earlier. I mean, the hardest thing in tapering, and even at events when you had a morning prelim and an evening final, was sitting around all day doing nothing, forcing yourself to do it. And you're like, it's so not part of my routine. Whereas I look at some of the best in the world, they have no problem. They do it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so it's like this, now I get it.
The 2008 Olympics. I mean, you don't need to be a swimmer to remember what Michael Phelps did. And, but I think as a swimmer, you do look at that accomplishment and think about all the trials, semifinals and finals that he did in 1 week. And you think about all the between that he had to nail and make that all a part of his routine. And I remember reading about how he prepared for that. And they had the schedule down for a year, they would practice taking those breaks. What are we going to do in between? How are we going to fuel in between? How are we going to make this part of just like a day-to-day when we're actually there in Beijing trying to achieve something that no one has ever achieved before?
We think of recovery so much as rest and all this, but and part of allostatic load is regeneration, your body's ability to regenerate itself. And are you creating the conditions to allow your body to regenerate? We're mammals. You look at any mammal in nature, it's rest and kill, right? They're not like doing all kinds of other things. I mean, talk about allostatic load. It's either briefly red, all out hunt, right? And then they're just doing nothing, right? But that's how we're designed as well. We're not designed for this simmering 6. And these are all different ways to capture, again, allostatic load.
That brings up a really interesting tangent that we could go down for hours. But how do you think increasing our load with technology, with smartphones, with computers, with different data inputs has affected that?
There's a cortisol response every time you're on social media, up or down. That's how it's designed to capture us. So therefore, that's part of the simmering.
Yeah.
Right? It's in there somehow. So less technology, even reading, right? Why do we fall asleep reading? I mean, we're all, you know as well as I do, how many people at night say, why? Because it automatically calms us. Yeah. It changes our breathing pattern. It uses a different part of our brain. It doesn't have all the noise and inputs. It's a single function. It's not necessarily because we're so exhausted. It's more that, this is a wind down activity actually for the brain. Mm-hmm. And you simplified it into one activity, and bingo, there you see allostatic load. That you're not able to stay in a single format function because all the other things are starting to come online with regards to regeneration, and it's tired. It just wants to go to sleep.
That's a good reminder to everybody that reading is good for you. Reading that is not on a screen is even better for you. I mean, this has been a part of your coaching framework for years. If someone, whether that's you identifying it or one of your athletes or executives comes to you and identifies it themselves and their load is too high, what's step one? How do you address this? What are some techniques here?
I just had this conversation with an executive the other day. I mean, he's had a rough year, major merger and acquisition. We're talking Fortune 50 company. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to see in his numbers, I'm like, wow, that resting heart rate really isn't good. And your HRV is really low. We're talking teens all the time, right? And he's my age. I mean, of course, those numbers aren't going to be super high, but not in the teens. And then lack of sleep, right? Mm-hmm. So first off, I don't feel that bad is the commentary often. I felt worse. I don't notice. I was actually thinking the other day, I feel sort of good. This is where it turns into, well, have you just been in this gray zone for so long that you don't even know what it's like to feel that good anymore, right? So it's just an honest, vulnerable conversation so that we start with sleep. Let's first start noticing and getting more sleep. And this is over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. Let's start capturing how we feel. And let's start seeing what it takes in your day-to-day to start manipulating those numbers. Resting heart rate, HRV, improving sleep quality, sleep depth, latency, all those things. And see how that affects the allostatic load. Right? We also want to do some cortisol blood work, right? That's not very common in blood work. And to see if that's been a little bit high, is that causing other issues in the body from a training perspective? Because he's also an athlete, former professional boxer, actually. And so, you put all this together, and of course he's in tune with his body, but we're all in tune with our body, especially listening to this, but it's more, have we just tuned out how good we could feel? And that's the important thing, to really start becoming hyper aware and then start seeing what's working. And then we'll double down on that. What works for Miguel, and therefore continuing to fine tune that allostatic load in the green so that then when he needs to push, when he needs to, get a major thing done at work or has a major event for sports or for work, that he's able to, that he shows up as his best self and he can push into the red. And there's a lot more available because his baseline, again, that real estate below threshold, the space, that more that's green, the more green you can create, the bigger the rise and the improvement and the energy that's available for when you need it becomes. And it's pretty amazing. Imagine you in your training. While training pretty strong, you still are able to increase the amount of green. You're going to go from level 2 to level 12 out of 10. Beautifully. You're going to be able to handle a huge load. Right? Let's say a huge training week. Let's say you're getting ready for an Ironman. You're like, I have a 4-week block coming up. That is just going to be massive. But you're going to absorb every one of those 28 days. That would be awesome.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to realize where you are on that scale before you head into a big training block like that. I think a common mistake with athletes, like you said, we're operating on a 6 or a 7 all the time, and that's just our baseline, and we don't realize that that's not a 1 or a 2, and we can achieve a 1 or a 2. Yep. And then the other common mistake for athletes is we head into that training block with, we're already at our threshold or close to it, and we tell ourselves, once we get into that block, that's when things start. That's when I'll get serious. But you can't achieve that first step in a training block without getting your mind and body ready to, like what you're saying, absorb that training. Because if you start stepping into the training without the capacity to absorb it, it's all going to waste.
Physically, a lot of it's going to waste. But here's the other, then it's just a mental resilience thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pushed myself through the fatigue. Okay, great. But we already know you can do that. You wouldn't be here or having this conversation or at this level. Like, there's other ways we can create more mental resilience and perseverance than doing something tired or not as good as it can be. And again, most of us went pro in something other than the sport we endeavor. And so therefore, I have limited training time. So I might as well make the most of the limited training time. And, if you just gave up 3 or 4 weekends because during the week you work and you have a big training block, I want those to count.
Wrapping this up, it seems like the most important thing in everything, whether it's identifying or making yourself better, is just the consistency over time. I mean, we're talking about a topic that is a cumulative effect by definition. And I think the best way to identify and move forward and improve is having cumulative strategies that stack up over time. And that's how you're going to move the needle.
Always tune into your body. Never tune your body out. It is telling you everything you need to know. And allostatic load is a hot term currently, but it's always been there. It's just like, tune in and listen.
Yeah. Well, Chris, this helped a lot from my understanding because it's complicated, and I hope it helped some of our listeners too. Thanks, Chris. We'll talk to you soon. That was my conversation with Chris Hauth, 2-time Olympian, Ironman age group world champion. If you're interested in learning more about Chris or engaging in his work, you can best find him through his newsletter. He's on Substack under the name Coach Chris. You can also head over to his website to learn more about his coaching, aimpcoaching.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.